Welcome to the Tough Decisions Daily Show with your hosts, Dan and Danae Hanford. As entrepreneurs and real estate investors, we are faced with tough decisions on a daily basis. These tough decisions can either make us or break us. On this show, you will hear from highly successful people sharing their stories behind tough decisions that they have had to make along their journey of success. In every episode, you will be able to learn from the thought processes behind the tough decisions that were made. Some of these decisions will have amazing outcomes, and some not so much. So without further ado, your hosts, Dan and Danae.
All right, thank you for joining us today on the Tough Decisions podcast with Dan and Danae. Today we have on with us Trevor McGregor. He's a master platinum coach, having completed over 15,000 coaching hours, working with hundreds of clients from around the world and helping them to achieve success and fulfillment. His clients include Fortune 500 executives, high-level real estate investors, entrepreneurs, world-class athletes, and professionals. Before launching his own coaching practice, Trevor was a master coach with the Anthony Robbins Group, offering elite coaching unlike any other program in the world. His mission is to assist others in realizing their true power and hidden potential to achieve more success, wealth, freedom, and contribution than they ever thought previously possible. Trevor lives with his wife and their 3 sons in Vancouver, Canada, and he is passionate about real estate, sports, and international travel. Trevor, thank you so much for being on with us today. Very interesting bio and some background on you, but give us a little bit of information about how you got into the coaching. I know you've been in several different levels now coaching. How did you get there, and what got you started as an entrepreneur yourself?
Oh, well, thank you very much. Great intro, and thanks for having me on the show, Danae and Dan. And yeah, my journey started many years ago. Obviously, in the intro, you said I was from Canada, born and raised in Canada, and absolutely grew up, middle-class family and played a lot of sports and, always wanted to be, doing a business or doing something that involved people. So I really set out to really understand, what choices were available to me. And I looked at various things as a teenager and as a young adult, went off to university, studied business, and ultimately ended up working for a company through college, and that was a real estate and hospitality company. And I thought it would be a very short stay for me, but ultimately, I fell in love with it because it was dealing with people. And I found myself in the marketing department. I did a little bit of finance, did a little bit of HR, a little bit of site selection, a little bit of procurement, and literally, grew up there and kind of grew up and literally learned the ins and outs of business from them and had a great, great ride.
So obviously along this journey that you've had up to this point, there's been several, decisions and albeit tough decisions that you've had to make along the way. Can you cherry pick maybe 2 really, tough decisions that you had, and maybe one that didn't go so well or didn't have the outcome that you expected, and then one that you made a decision on and you knew from the beginning it was good and it just continued to provide success for you in that decision?
You bet. And it really carries that story through, because at a certain point when I was 29 years old, the company invited me to invest in the expansion. So we were going to take a very large sum of money and pour it into an expansion here in Canada. And I got really excited because, again, I had been in the organization for almost 10 years at that time. And ultimately, I knew that this was my ticket to really go out there and make a lot of money and maybe retire rich and early, as they like to say. So I took all of my money and I literally borrowed off of all of my family and friends. And guys, I even convinced my own parents to take out a 6-figure mortgage on their home. I mean, the home that we grew up, the family home. And I poured all of this money, well into 6 figures, into this, expansion. And things went well for a couple of years, but then 2001 hit, 9/11 hit. And we were in such a massive expansion and going too far too fast. People got scared. They thought the world was ending. People stopped going out. And literally all of our projections and all of our cash flows and everything went upside down. And to cut to the chase, I ended up losing all of the money that I put into this expansion.
What kind of business was it?
It was a franchise, a restaurant franchise, a brand new franchise where we really thought that we would rival some of the giants out there. And it had worked in other cities, and it would have worked here, but we just went too fast. Didn't have the backup, didn't have the people, didn't have the systems or the infrastructure. And, in hindsight, I would have done it all over again, much slower. And I think it might have worked, but I think sometimes the universe gives us a lesson, that we're meant to learn, and that lesson goes on and helps us in a later part of life. But the worst part of that was, well, now I was faced with that really tough decision. Number one, how do I tell my very own parents that I lost all of the money? And number two, what do I do now? I mean, I was married, I had a young family, I had all of this debt, and I either had to decide to stay in that business or go out there and dust myself off and pick myself up and, find something where I can make some money and start chipping away at that debt and repaying it. So that was really the decision that I had. Number one is I was faced with the decision of telling my parents about it. And number two, what was I going to do career-wise to go put food on the table, let alone start paying back the loans?
I want to kind of dissect this decision just a little bit more too, because, obviously the decision to go fast and expand and pour a lot of money and OPM, I like to call it other people's money to help you kind of grow and expand. At the time that you were growing and expanding and you were bringing on, outside investors, if you will, even though it was family, they were still outside investor money that were coming into this organization or this venture that you were working on. Did you see things earlier on prior to maybe 9/11, did you see some things that could really kind of concern you that you should have maybe paid attention to before things happened, or was it just kind of like an all of a sudden thing that really hit you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there were some signs. There were some, things where we were really didn't have the manpower that we really needed. We were opening up in 5 major cities in Canada instead of picking one market and doing it, one at a time. My partners in that deal were, obviously really aggressive and they had a little bit more of the ownership than I personally had. So the lion's share of the decisions went to them. And I thought, man, I think we're biting off more than we could chew. But, we had been in the business before successfully. So I figured, why not? Let's roll the dice. Let's go make it happen. And that's when the other shoe dropped in.
So this franchise that you guys were doing, was it already like a proven concept in other parts of Canada, or was it a proven concept in the United States that you guys were bringing into Canada, or what was that dynamic?
Yeah, it was US and Canada. So it was in its infancy stages. But again, it would be like at the forefront of really being ready to jump on a McDonald's or being ready to jump on a Subway or one of the main franchises. Because it was, again, in what we called the big 3. That was either in burgers and pizza and sub sandwiches. And ultimately, we wanted to corner the Canadian market. And so that's the route that we went with it.
So with these aggressive partners, did they also see the writing on the wall, or were they kind of blinded by the future success and the future dollars?
I think they were blinded by the future success and future dollars. I think there's sometimes decisions that we make where we put the cart before the horse, so to speak, and we really think about the end result without getting all of our ducks in a row. And I think they saw the opportunity to do a master franchise. I think they saw the opportunity to really, not have to grow it, from a corporate standpoint, but more from a franchise standpoint as a master franchisor. And ultimately, it all went up in flames.
So this definitely was a decision that probably didn't turn out the way you wanted or expected. And as Dan and I have talked before, we definitely learn more from those tough decisions or those maybe what we call failures or problems that come. But do you have another decision that you've made that was a hard decision, but that has worked out in a positive light or has worked out exactly like you expected it to?
Well, you bet. And it does carry on from that same story, because there I was. And once I broke the news to my parents, and they were absolutely, dumbfounded, because again, they trusted me. I'm pretty smart. I studied business. I'd been in that industry for a while. Once kind of the shock and the news broke, I thought, man, this is a real opportunity for me to choose and make a decision that is going to support not only me and my family, but pay back my parents and then some. And that is when I found real estate. That's when I made the decision to say, you know what? What's the fastest wealth vehicle that I could get into that I could still use other people's money and have the opportunity to scale? And what I did, guys, is I hired my very first coach, because I didn't even know what a coach was at the time. But I knew that when people were struggling, one of the best things that you could do was to seek a coach or a teacher or a mentor or a trainer. And I found one of the leading real estate experts in Canada. And I literally, started to dive into his books. I started to go listen to his audios. And then I went to a conference, and it was at the conference where he said, you know what, come in under my wing and I'll show you how to scale your real estate. And so I started to read the books, listen to the audios, go to the events. And I literally scraped together roughly $27,000, from family and friends and my 401k that was left over. And I bought one little townhouse and I got a great deal on it. And that was a great experience. So I, refinanced it, took the equity out of it, and I bought a condo. So there I was literally a year later. I had owned 2 properties that I got really good deals on. I refinanced the second one, and then I went on to buy my very first duplex. And I'm telling you, that's when I learned what cash flow was. I mean, who doesn't love cash flow? And so I started to have some appreciation. Another year went by, and then I bought the other duplex next door. And it was really around that time, after 3 years, that I was able to pull all the equity out, pay my parents back, pay all my failed loans back, and keep building my real estate portfolio. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. And the question that I'd have for you is, obviously, you just lost 6 figures worth of money in a venture and an investment. How in the world did you convince your family to help you come up with this $27,000?
Well, it really wasn't family. It was friends. It was people that believed in me. It was people that knew that I was like totally immersed in this real estate training. And, I think when somebody has a coach, a teacher, a mentor, a trainer that's proven, that's already done what it is you're trying to do, it makes a world of difference. And again, I owe my life to these people, because it was really, that was the turning point that then allowed me to go out there and buy property after property after property after property. And then I was at one of my son's soccer games, and the soccer coach said, "Hey, Trevor, how you doing?" And I said, "I'm great." He says, "What are you up to?" I said, "Well, I just bought another property." And he goes, "Well, didn't you just buy one before?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, how many do you have now?" And I said, "Colin, I have 4 properties." And he goes, "You know what? Would you sit down and show my wife and I what you're doing? Because we've always wanted to buy a rental property." And I said, "Well, sure, buy me a beer and I'll sit down." And we literally did that weekend, guys. And it was a 4-hour meeting where I literally gave them the keys to the kingdom to go out there and literally rinse and repeat what I was doing. And 3 months later, they bought their very first rental property. They pulled the equity out, refinanced it. 3 months later, bought their second one. And then ultimately, people started to ask them how they learned how to do this. They said, "Well, Trevor taught us." And that's when people started to come to me on the baseball field, the soccer pitch, and just literally pick my brain. And I truly believe that that's when the coaching bug bit. And that's when I started to make my way into the world of personal growth, personal development, and coaching as a potential career.
So obviously this $27,000 that you were able to borrow from friends were different friends than you had originally borrowed money from, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
They weren't people that you already had owed money. They were going to give you more money.
No. They wouldn't give me a ham sandwich if I asked them.
So how long did it take you to actually pay back all the money that you had lost from the first venture that had gone south?
Yeah, great question. It was just over 3 years, 3 years, 2 months from the time that I borrowed the money and literally went out there and did the expansion till the time that I paid my parents back. And literally, man, that was like the biggest, breath of fresh air and the biggest release of sighing and energy from my body I've ever had. And ultimately, my dad pulled me aside and he said, "I'm really proud of you," and that really made me feel even more that, man, there's people out there struggling. There's people out there that this is happening to, daily. And that's when I really, really resolved. That means I decided to go out there and potentially make coaching my career. So I literally started part-time. And I was working with yet another coach from the Tony Robbins organization at that time. And he said, "Trevor, you're so passionate about business. You're so passionate about real estate. And you're so passionate about people. Would you consider coming and working for Tony Robbins?" And I laughed and I said, "You know what? I'd love to, but I don't have time to commit full-time." And he said, "Well, just come and start part-time." And so I applied to the Tony Robbins organization. And that's no easy task. I mean, just because you apply doesn't mean you get in. There were over 500 applicants for that round of hiring. They took the 500 down to 250 down to 100. And out of the 100 that are left, they started the interview process to get to a final 50. And believe it or not, I made the cut. So in that final 50, they whittled it down to 20. And it's at that point where you literally have to go to all of the Tony Robbins events. You got to read the books. You got to listen to the audios. And even then, after 18 months of doing all of that, you're still not a coach. You've got to come to the US and do the full practicum. That is literally where you coach real people in real situations and prove that you are capable of moving somebody from where they are to where they want to be. And it was a nerve-wracking, intense process, but I'm proud to say that when the dust settled, I graduated as the number one male coach in the class.
Wow. Out of 500 applicants being number one.
There was a woman that scored just higher than me, so she literally got number one. Overall, I got number two, but I like to tell people I got the number one male spot for coaching.
That's why you qualified it with male.
That's correct. That's correct. So then I was faced with a decision, a tough decision, which was, was I going to commit to Tony full time, or was I going to commit to Tony part time, or was I going to do my own thing? And, thank God I chose the first one, and that was to commit to Tony full time. I absolutely left anything that I was doing in hospitality, set my real estate career on the back burner for a minute, and I went full into total immersion coaching year after year after year. And the rest is history. I mean, I've done over 15,000 coaching calls. I coach people at Microsoft and American Express and Dell and Oracle. But my favorite are real estate entrepreneurs and business owners who literally, are onesies and twosies that are really struggling to get out there and absolutely create the impact and income that they want. And so this is what I now do full time. I literally work from my home office in Vancouver, Canada. I work 4.5 days a week. I take Friday afternoons off, so I've always got a long weekend. And I've got clients in 36 different US states now. I've got clients in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, even Asia, and I love it.
That's a really great story and a great ending to, what started out as a problem. Some might say a little problem, maybe a big problem.
Yeah.
Can you talk just a little bit? Something that I kind of latched onto in your story there was when you had that failure with the franchise and you were looking at what you're going to do next, you talked about getting a coach. And sometimes that's a hard thing to do because it does involve money at a time when maybe money is not something that's readily available. Talk about the importance of that decision that you made. And of course, you're a coach now, so we would expect you to talk about the importance of a coach. But in your mind, what is it that a coach brings to the table that makes it important for an entrepreneur?
Yeah, what a great question. And again, it's really simple because, again, a coach is somebody who's trained in many different modalities of psychology and business strategy. And oftentimes they can see things that you can't see because you're in it. So again, by having a coach, you get a different perspective. You get a sounding board. You get the ability to co-create what are your options. And then from that point, you're able to take action on the option that best serves you and gets you closest to your outcome. And yes, some coaches cost a lot of money, but there are still coaches out there that do free coaching, pro bono coaching. Some do mentoring. If you can't afford a coach, you can always get an accountability partner, somebody that can support you in reading great books, listening to podcasts like yours, going to personal growth events. Because I say this all the time, that it's never a matter of resources. It's a matter of resourcefulness. And it really speaks to the fact, are you interested to crush it in your business, or are you committed? Because there's a big difference. And here's what it is. People that are interested will hire a coach or find a mentor if it's convenient. But people that are committed, guys, they'll do whatever it takes to get the support they need to go further faster. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, sure. And your point about the availability of information now is a good one too, because, 25, 30 years ago, you almost had to have that one-on-one connection. But now with the internet, information is so readily available via podcasts or blog articles, or just so much out there that if you want the information, you can get it. Obviously, that one-on-one coaching is very valuable as well, but it's there if you want it. What would you recommend as a resource or specifically a book, maybe that you'd recommend to our listeners that has helped you in your decision-making or maybe helped you in your journey as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, thank you for that. Without question, there's one book that changed my life, and that was Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. It is my Bible. I've read it at least 25 times. I listen to the audio in my SUV at least, 100 times. My own children can recite certain parts of what Napoleon Hill says in certain chapters. It literally is not just what you do. It's how you think about who you are and how your psychology is, how your identity is, and whether you're interested or committed. And that book was really one of the foundations that allowed me to really, pivot from my loss to really my gain and going out there and believing that there is no failure. There's only feedback. And I got a lot of feedback. I got 6 figures worth of negative feedback. And that was the universe's way of seeing how resilient I was, seeing how tough I was, seeing if I was going to be defeated by it or if I was going to get up, dust myself off, and keep on marching. So, as tough as it was to go through that episode at the time, I believe it was a great blessing. And I got to give huge props to Think and Grow Rich for helping me out of it.
And I thought that you were going to say a Tony Robbins book.
Well, Tony will kill me if I don't mention Personal Power or Awaken the Giant Within.
I was going to say, you got to say one of those two,
You bet. Yeah, Tony's amazing. He's an absolute amazing force of nature. And I've just been so blessed and so grateful to have a sneak peek into, how he operates and how all 33 of his companies operate. He does a combined revenue of about $5 billion a year. Yes, that's with a B, 5 billion. And he truly is the master. Been doing it for 45 years in hundreds of countries around the world. And to be a master platinum coach for him was an absolute honor.
That's awesome. So let's shift gears here a little bit and tell us a little bit about one of the most exciting things that you've done with the money that you've made so far.
Oh, I love that. Well, I'll tell you, it's been an absolute blessing to be able to earn the income from real estate and from executive coaching. And my wife, Lisa, and I, we live here in Vancouver, but we actually travel every single quarter of the year internationally. So we take that money and instead of buying boats and cars and material things, we like to have experiences. So last year alone, we were in Hong Kong, we were in Italy, we were in Alaska. We took an Alaskan cruise and we spent a month in Australia. This year we're off to Paris next month. We're going to London. Then we're in California. Then in September, we're in Costa Rica. And I'm pleased to say that our family is going to spend 6 weeks over Christmas in Australia this coming, winter. So it's really a beautiful, beautiful blue planet that we live on. And I truly believe that, if you go out there and hustle, if you really, honor the fact that it's about value creation and you go out there and you help other people get what they want, they'll help you get the money that you want to go out there and live your life to the fullest.
And what's the number one item on your bucket list right now?
Wow, the number one item on my bucket list is to continue to travel to different, places that we've never been. We are continuing to up-level ourselves in addition to the real estate revenue streams we've got, the coaching streams. I do some consulting. I do a lot of keynote speaking professionally, stood on stages throughout Canada, the US, as far away as Australia. My wife and I have also started some online businesses. We just launched a new business that deals with inspirational canvas art. It's called Pure Positive Vibes, and you can literally pick up some great canvas art for your home with some of the most beautiful inspirational messages on the planet. And we are all about really total immersion. That is absolutely, listening to podcasts like yours and Danae and, traveling the world, being inspired, living a great life, giving back to charity. And at the end of the day, when we do our rocking chair test, as Tony Robbins calls it, we're going to be able to do it with a huge smile on our face.
So being someone that likes to travel, what would you say is one place that you want to travel to that you want to make sure that you do before you die? I know you've probably traveled many, many different places that you've already crossed off your bucket list, but what's that place for you?
Yeah, the next big one I think is going to be Africa. I mean, we teach our kids, we have 3 beautiful boys, and we always have taught them, about giraffes and elephants and, zebras and lions. And just to be able to go to an African safari and see them in the wild, I think that'd be pretty cool, don't you?
Oh, yeah. And I'll tell you, I actually just took a trip to Grand Cayman this past weekend, and my son, I brought along with me, my 6-year-old. And one of the things that was neat for him to be able to see is, there's a lot of wild, obviously they have lizards and things like that, but they have a lot of wild, not lizards, but they're a little bit larger. Iguanas, there they are. I knew that we took lots of pictures of those. There was probably thousands of iguanas, just, you driving down the road and seeing wild iguanas and crabs walking across the floor, across the asphalt as you're driving. You got to dodge those though, because if you hit one, it might pop a tire or something. But our next place is actually going to be the Azores. So I right off the coast of Portugal. Have you ever been there?
I have not, but I've had colleagues and fellow coaches that have gone to Portugal and said it's absolutely spectacular.
Well, that's going to be one of mine. So hopefully we'll do that this year. We'll see. So thank you so much, Trevor, for being on the call with us today and sharing with our listeners. If the listeners want to reach out to you, get some more information about you or start following you, how can they do that?
Thank you very much for having me on the show. And yes, we make it very, very easy. You can just go to my website, which is www.trevormcgregor.com. That's TrevorMcGregor.com. Or if you want to book just a simple, discovery call with me, if you're a business owner or you're a solopreneur, an entrepreneur, or you're in real estate, you can book a free call by going to www.coachwithtrevor.com. Enter in your details. I'll reach out to you and let's chat.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much again, Trevor, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
You as well. Thanks for having me on and keep up the great work.
All right. Thanks.
Take care.
Do you want to nominate a highly successful entrepreneur or real estate investor to be a guest on this show? Email us at dan@toughdecisions.net. Help us by spreading the word about our show with your friends. And also take time right now to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or your favorite platform. You've been listening to The Tough Decisions Show.